Hello and welcome to episode 20 of the Writing Talk podcast. And I'm sorry there's been a big gap between episode 19 and 20, but hopefully we'll try and get you back on track. So in a minute we'll have a quick romp through my little bits of news, then we'll get on to the main topic, which this week is all about writing effective dialogue. Then we'll have a little look at the writer's feedback section and talk about some developments there, which will take us into the writer's toolbox section at the end. Welcome to the Writing Talk podcast, a show that helps you to build your skills as we go on our writing journey together. Okay, well, it's been quite a busy and interesting time for me over the last sort of few weeks, which is why I haven't had the podcast out, I'm afraid, so sorry about that again. But I finally released my book called Outcast, which is the second full-length novel in my Darkening Stone series, and that's been an awful long time coming. It's had all kinds of setbacks on the way, but I managed to get a few pre-orders, in which was nice. It's always kind of a nice feeling that you feel like you're launching straight away with some people wanting to buy the book, which is very, very kind of a rewarding feeling to have. I only did that for about a couple of weeks. I don't sort of go into these long things because anyway, when I tend to launch a new book, I like to sort of give existing fans the best possible deal. So I tend to put things out at a low price, so typically around half price, and try and leave it that way for a good long while. Give people who get my newsletter a good chance to get in and get it at the best price. And it went quite well. I mean, nothing astronomical, but I think the hard truth is that it does take quite a time to build up an audience and sort of gain momentum with your books and with your series. But it was nice that at least I finally do have another book out in a series. And as I said before, it's been a long time coming. And it feels like a really important milestone to me. I know that everyone will always say to you, oh, you must write a series. And, you kind of think, well, yeah, that's all very well to say, but, I'm not quite there yet. But when you do get there, it is nice. And the penny finally dropped with me that, actually what it's all about is you get another title in there that you can sell. The thing is, you don't really have to promote that new book because all you have to do is keep promoting the first one in the series. So, you're building up your back catalogue, but at the same time, you're not really adding to the burden of your marketing. In fact, if anything, you're making your marketing easier because you're not just saying, look, here's this thing I've got. You're saying, look at these cool things which I can introduce you to. And there are some extra advantages as well, like on the Amazon.com USA site, you can have a nice series landing page going for you. I mean, that is apparently supposed to happen automatically so long as you've set everything up correctly in KDP and you've got the series, volume numbers and everything there. But mine didn't work, so I was impatient and I just contacted them. And, they're good. There's a contact us button in the KDP dashboard, and that's Kindle Direct Publishing, if you're not familiar with that. And they're usually sort of prompt and helpful with most things that you ask them, depending what it is. And what else have I done? Okay, well, after the last Writing Talk podcast, which was all about writing courses and the idea of sort of other alternative avenues for communities and so on, I decided to set up a Facebook group for this podcast. So there is one there now if you want to go and join it. So for anybody who's interested and you think you might benefit from giving and receiving a bit of support with your writing and your writing craft, the address is facebook.com/groups/WTP workshop. And that's all one word, that last bit. So it's WTP workshop in the group. So, if you search for that, you should be able to find it. I've got some sort of plans in the works for that, but we'll see how it goes. The idea is to kind of tie the group together with the podcast, and I thought it'd be a good place to go along. You can make requests there if there's anything you'd like me to discuss on the podcast. A good place to go for that. Also, if you want to share your hints and tips on anything to do with the writing craft. So I'm hoping that'll be a nice little place where we can all go and help each other out. I'd also like to start a new feature, a kind of writing clinic type feature on the podcast. So I'll be putting that in the group and asking, sending a call out. So if there's something maybe you want a hand with, I mean, it'll kind of be themed, but the idea is if there's something you want a hand with, we can put it up there in the group and it can be discussed there, and then we can take that into the podcast for the wider audience as well and, see what we've come up with. So I'm hoping that's a good way of just spreading good practice around, helping each other, just sharing it out really. And I hope the podcast will come in really useful for that. And it's about time we rattled on with the main topic. Okay, so the main topic this week is all about writing really great dialogue. I think good dialogue is so important. It's the key to creating an engaging story. Dialogue can do so many things. It's sort of a Swiss Army knife, really, because it can move the story forward. It can paint your characters so that they seem really real. It can deliver some subtext or a theme, perhaps. It can certainly express emotions in a way that's really immediate, and I think that keeps your writing in the moment, which is something I think we should strive for. And all of those together, they combine, really. They have cumulative effect of drawing the reader in, which is exactly what we want. Now, I'm not going to go back with the nuts and bolts of like the punctuations and stuff, because a podcast isn't really the right place, because you need written examples. I mean, there will be some examples, and there'll be a bit more in the show notes, but there are other places, and I'll put a link. If you do struggle with the punctuation at all, there's a site I found called Punctuation Made Simple, and I'll if that's still working, I'm not sure if it's still up, that site, but anyway, I'll find a good resource for you, and I'll put it in the show notes. Although there are many places that you can look that sort of thing up. But anyway, we'll cover a few of the kind of basics. So let's just think about speech attribution. Now the key here is to keep it simple and keep it clear. And again, if you're not sure, speech attribution is where you attribute a piece of speech to a character. So that should be really simple and clear, because I really hate it. I'm reading a story and I honestly don't know who's speaking. I mean, if you look at a piece of your writing and there can be any doubt as to who's speaking, then perhaps it's time to just pop in your character's name. I mean, if that would make your writing too repetitive, then see if you can find another way of identifying the character. For example, the old man, the security guard, her mother, something like that refers to the character in a way that is crystal clear. And if you've got two people, somebody might refer to, you could say, the younger man or, the older man or something like that. I mean, think of ways around that. I can't sort of give a cure-all for that. It's just, it has to be clear. And if that doesn't sit well with your piece, then you may have to think about rewriting that scene. But that said, it's important you don't deliver your dialogue in a monotonous way. If you have an endless stream of sentences that all begin with he said, she said, he said, she said, it's very dull. So, I mean, one of the simple ways that you can avoid that kind of pile-up of saids is to move your reporting clause around within the speech. So, if you're not sure, reporting clause is the name given to that chunk of your sentence that tells us who is speaking. It's like the grammar name for it's the name I was taught anyway. Such as, for example, he said would be an example of a reporting clause. And the job it does is speech attribution. I hope that makes that a bit clearer. It's easy to kind of fall into a rhythm, especially when you're bashing out a first draft, of always putting the reporting clause in the same place. You might find you have a habit of always putting it at the beginning or always putting it at the end. But it's actually a simple way of providing, But it's actually a simple way of providing a bit of variety for your reader, if it's sometimes at the beginning of the sentence, sometimes at the end, and sometimes in the middle. The nice thing about placing your reporting clause in the middle of a character's speech is it works really well when it occurs at a place when the character might pause. It's a subtle way of forcing your reader to follow your character's speech patterns. And I'll just give some examples. Most of these examples I just picked up Outcast and sort of flicked through to found an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. So I've got one here. But you knew that, Callie said. I thought you understood. And, you can kind of imagine, I didn't read it with much expression, I'm afraid, but you can imagine the character pausing in exasperation at that point. But you knew that. I thought you understood. That was better, wasn't it? But having that Callie said in the middle there kind of just forced that pause. I guess you could have used a dash or something, but if I needed the reporting clause anyway, then why not just put it there? And in fact, without it, you would need some other punctuation or something, or it would just read, but you knew that, I thought you understood, which doesn't read well, it doesn't really make sense. Okay, so, move your reporting clause around a little bit from time to time, as long as it doesn't mangle what you're trying to say. Another nice way of avoiding that sort of constant repetition of a reporting clause, so he goes, he said, is to let you know that it's time for your readers to focus their attention on a certain character by just telling them about that character's body language. And here's another little example. So, Callie bit her bottom lip. Do you think anybody heard us? And you can sort of see, I didn't need to say that was Callie speaking. It was pretty obvious that, she bit her bottom lip and then she said that. She obviously didn't do it at the same time. That would be difficult. But I think that's reasonably clear. So it's just a thing that was perhaps reporting clause before it and after it. And, it's nice not to have one on some of them. And I think, again, that works best really if it ties in. So if the body language ties in to what the character is actually saying. So here's another example. The younger man stared at Tom. Perhaps if you hadn't... Oh, that ends in a dash, so it was... I can't read the dash out loud, but, the fact that he's staring at him then is followed up by this kind of slightly scolding, well, perhaps if you hadn't done such and such, and then he was interrupted. But, sort of make it fit the tone or the action or whatever's going on. So, if somebody's exasperated, perhaps you tell us that they run their hands through their hair or something, and then you just go into their speech. That's a quick trick just to do. And similarly, you can put a bit of action in there if that contributes something to it. So here's another little example. Skjort drew his knife and smiled. I'll cut his throat. That's the quickest way. And, and it goes together. I think we don't need to say he said there. It would be redundant. It'd be pointless. It's snappier without it. Okay, so that's just a quick few little sort of tricks you can get for a bit of variety in there that can work effectively. Just be wary in your dialogue, depending how long you've been at this game. Two-handers are always easier. If you've got two people, if they're both of the same gender, it gets a little bit harder because you do have to watch out with the he's and the hises and things like that. Similarly, the she's or the hers can be confusing. But what you should really watch out for is if you are going to go for three or more characters and they're talking together, you do have to be really, really careful because we don't want the reader to have any doubt about who's speaking. But at the same time, you don't want to slow it down too much with too many he said, she said sort of things, because we really need to maintain the flow through the scene and keep that story moving forward. The other thing to watch out for if you've got three or more people talking is it's very easy to accidentally head hop. That's where you slip into somebody else's point of view in the same scene. It's generally regarded as bad practice, though some genres find it okay. It's one of those things that people argue about. But anyway, on the whole, it's probably best avoided. And it's very easy in a sort of, three or more people talking together. It's very easy to start going into another character's point of view. And you have to watch out for that. If your main character, if the person whose head we're in, if you like, couldn't know exactly what somebody's thinking, perhaps you could say he's looking at someone, and he looks as if he's deep in thought or something like that, rather than give us that person's thought, because we're not in his head, we're in the other person's head. I hope that's clear enough. So it's basically saying it's something you've got to watch out for. It's the kind of thing you might pick up in your revision stage, actually, when something to look for in your editing. Okay, there's an old idea, you should only ever use said. I can't remember which writer said it. Probably more than one have said it. Only ever use he said or she said as the verb. And it's a reasonable kind of rule of thumb. Said is a great one to use because it kind of does its job and then disappears into the background, which is exactly what you want. But you really do need to have some variety in your dialogue, or it'll just become far too repetitive. And then what happens is you'll have inadvertently drawn attention to your reporting clauses, because people are very good at spotting patterns. And if it becomes too much of a pattern through the dialogue, people will notice it. And that pile up of he said, she said will actually spoil your reader's enjoyment because they'll be looking at it. It's the equivalent of kind of, you don't think Peter Pan's flying because you're too busy looking at the wire. We need to sort of keep out of the way. So the other problem with just having said is it doesn't have sort of much of a nuance to it. So I think it's really important in a group, or even if there's like two or more people, that you just need to know whether everyone can hear something that's been spoken. So using verbs such as whispered, murmured, muttered, I think they're really useful because there's a sort of nuance to that, that somebody doesn't want the other person to hear it perhaps, or perhaps only the person next to them hears it and the other person doesn't. And similarly, you might refer to someone as speaking under her breath because perhaps she's saying something that she doesn't want the other characters to hear. Okay, so by contrast to that, verbs such as yelled and called or called out, really useful to put in there. I think it doesn't need explaining, does it really? But they carry a meaning which he said, she said just doesn't. If somebody's yelled something, we need to know it, and perhaps it's good time to use an exclamation mark if somebody's yelling something, by the way. I do use a fairly limited number of verbs, but I do like to use a few of them. I almost have a kind of mental list of ones that I tend to use. They can be really quite an economical way of showing an emotion. For instance, I like the verb hissed. He hissed. I think there's something to that that helps. It can be used kind of angrily or whatever, or in frustration somebody can hiss, Occasionally things like growled and snarled are nice as well. Watch out for ones that don't actually make sense, that don't sort of go too buckish. You see people using gasped. Well, somebody can gasp if they don't know what to say. If you've ever tried to gasp a word, you sort of gasp, how you can't really speak at the same time. So, don't just watch out for some of those that seem a bit flowery. They're often a bit silly and best avoided, I think. The other thing to go for avoiding, if you can, is generally the adverbs, particularly the sort of, not all adverbs end in ly, but those ones that do are often kind of, he said in this way, he said this way, he said that way. That can just kind of, again, draw attention to the reporting clause when it's not, its job is just to let you know who's talking and roughly how. They're often redundant, so it's better to pick a strong verb in the first place than try and sort of tart up a rubbish verb with an adverb. For example, this is something you do see. If you want someone to use a threatening tone, fine, say they're using a threatening tone, but don't use the word threateningly. He muttered threateningly is just kind of, I don't know, just to me that's kind of an ugly phrase. Go for something more poetic if you like. You might say something like, when she spoke, her voice was a savage whisper, or something like that. And no, I didn't just make that up. I did pre-prepare that. So, something like that is nice, and that adds something. Whereas an adverb kind of doesn't really add enough. It doesn't pull its weight. So watch out for that. Maybe occasional ones like slowly or carefully, they might be useful, and so it's not a general rule. You can't say, never use these. Sometimes, somebody's speaking slowly because they may be slightly patronising, or they're trying to calm somebody down. I'd just say they spoke slowly, it's fine. And you might want to say things like saying, the character kept her voice steady. Again, she's being patient or calm, or perhaps trying to sort of boost her courage, or encourage someone, keeping her voice steady when everyone else is upset, perhaps. Little phrases like that and little short descriptive sentences just can add a bit of colour to the dialogue. And they are, I think, much better than describing and explaining the character's thoughts and emotions overtly. Rather than say somebody's feeling angry or whatever, I'd rather that somebody had a little phrase in there that just described how they spoke, and I will figure out what their emotions are from that. From the way that they speak and from what they say, I should be able to tell their emotions. I shouldn't need telling that someone's angry or annoyed or frustrated or exasperated. I should just be able to tell. If you do use another little sentence like, saying somebody kept their voice steady, or, their voice was harsh or whatever, just please be aware that that's not actually a reporting clause. And so you have to just be careful with your punctuation. It's hard to sort of cover the examples when you're listening to this rather than watching it written in front of you. But but just watch out for that. You do sometimes see people misusing that, because the reporting clause is the bit, the he said, she said, separated with a comma, either before or after, depending how you've written it. And you shouldn't do that if the sentence that you're adjoining to it isn't actually a reporting clause, but is a separate descriptive little chunk on its own. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense. Just an example off the top of my head, you'll sometimes say, he laughed or whatever. Well, you can't, that's not a reporting clause. It's not attributing the next piece of speech to him. You can't laugh some words. You can laugh and then you can speak, but you can't laugh the words. So I hope that makes sense. Makes some sense to you. Also, with all of this, I'd say with your descriptive phrases and your reporting clauses, that you're jazzing them up a bit. Keep them rather like salt and pepper. Don't overdo them. Most of the time you can get away with saying the character just said something, and it's just nice to keep the variety in by just sort of peppering a few of those extra ones around. But don't overdo it. It'll just spoil the whole thing and draw too much attention to it. So let's have a think about the content of the dialogue. Now you may have heard of the idea of on-the-nose dialogue. On-the-nose dialogue is, if you don't know that phrase before, it's fairly self-explanatory. It's kind of where the speech of the character overtly describes or explains the story or the situation or the scene or something like that. It's the sort of thing you sometimes hear in soap operas where, kind of person will explain what's happened in the previous episode when they see them. And people don't talk like that. And it just makes it a deal breaker. It's kind of, hi Frank, are you still working at the glue factory or whatever? People don't say that. They say, oh, hi, you still at the same old place or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So people don't explain things to each other. What? Why are you speaking in that odd way? So, don't do it. It's easy to do by accident in a draft because you're trying to get the story out of your head and onto your document. And it's something to look out for, particularly in revision. If you found you've kind of veered into on-the-nose territory, just back up a bit and rewrite it. Your readers will be grateful, I'm sure. Because really, your readers want to be engaged with your dialogue. And that means that you've got to let them put their imaginations to work. It's not your job as the writer to point out every little detail and explain it to them. And anyway, in real life, really what is not said is at least as important as what is said. And the more difficult and tense a situation is, the less likely it is that the characters can simply talk it over as if they were discussing the weather or something mundane, And conversely, when there's gaps in the dialogue, the reader will instinctively, without really thinking about it, just pick up on the tension that's building up between the characters. So that's kind of the two sides of the coin. I said conversely, which is probably not the right use of that word, but it's difficult on the microphone sometimes to get the right word. But so they're just two sides of the same coin, really. There's you leaving the gaps of the imagination to get to work, and there is the reader sort of actively using their imagination just to pick up on things without even thinking about it. So as the writer, you've got control over that. Writing is remote control for readers. You control how long you want that tension to build up. You can leave it unresolved. It can all be released in an explosion of action or dialogue. You control it. It's kind of almost like writing dialogue, almost like playing an instrument or something, a musical instrument. It's just thinking that the pacing is important, that the build-up, the expression, all these sort of drama that's coming along, it all kind of comes together in dialogue in quite a natural way. And when I said, you can build it up and then release it in an explosion if you want to, you don't have to. You can just leave it unresolved. But I don't mean literally kind of explosion of people yelling at each other. It could be that somebody, just stands up, turns their nose up in the air and stalks out of the room and slams the door behind them, or maybe they're a bit more sort of passive aggressive and they leave the door deliberately wide open because they know it'll, annoy the other person. All these things are just fun just to put in, and don't explain them, just put them there and leave them. and let the reader think, oh, yeah, I identify with that situation, It's up to you. Dialogue is a great thing to play around with it. It's quite easy just to play around with it and see what works. It's quite easy to tinker with it and really take it up a notch, especially in the revision stages. And as you're doing that, as with all writing, I always think it's a good idea. It's a good technique to try and make every single word pull its weight. We don't want your dialogue to be on the nose, but the things that your character say should reveal something about their character, their sort of natures, or it should move the story forward, hopefully both at the same time. Your readers will lose interest if your dialogue seems to be just there for the sake of it. And that is really something to look for in revision, because it's really easy. Again, you're rolling through a good old bit of drafting, and you don't realise that you're kind of putting in a bit of sort of blah, 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 kind of, just passing the time of day stuff. I should cut that down and just watch out in case you find yourself putting in kind of little crutch phrases. A beta reader helped me with this. And, when somebody helps you with something, you never forget it. And things like starting off a sentence with, well, it's about time we went to the thing, is not really any better than it's about time we went to the thing. It's just, so what is that well doing there? Not really, you can cut it out, because before you know it, you've every character saying, well this, well that, well the other, and it's just watch out for things like that. It might be part of your character that they're sort of quite a slow person and they begin every sentence with well, but it could just get a bit of an annoying tick and annoy your readers. So just watch out for those things. You want your dialogue to be naturalistic. So a good way to pick up tips on really naturalistic and effective dialogue is to watch really well written films, TV shows, just not just any trash, but some of the ones that are really finely honed. Some comedies and sitcoms and things that are really finely written, so that every word pulls its weight. They can be nice. Some I've got full of admiration for screenwriters. They're just amazing experts in effective dialogue, really are. So for my money, one of the things I like, I guess it wouldn't be to everybody's taste, but I think radio plays, radio dramas are a fantastic way of picking up dialogue. They're a really pure form of drama that is pretty much dialogue driven, because there isn't much else. A few sound effects, a bit of music, and the rest is talking. So there are some really nice ones. The BBC do good ones. If you go to their website, I'm sure you can figure it out from there. They have the iPlayer, which you can listen to, and there's a variety, and some you'll like, some you won't, some you'll think, oh, that works, and others you think, well, that doesn't, because I don't know who the heck's talking, because they have to do it without any reporting clauses, so they have to really make the actors work for it. But that's a good place to pick up some dialogue. If you're listening to a radio drama thinking, I'm absolutely just entranced with this, I've forgotten what time it is, I've missed my bus, whatever, that's a good one. It's drawn you in. And how did they do that? What did they do that worked? Another bit of advice that people often quote is to listen to speech patterns of real people. And that's great especially if you're writing characters outside your own experience. So, if your characters are a different age or gender or whatever to you, it's good to sort of listen into people, to sort of, you don't want people to say, oh, well, somebody would never say that, a woman would never say that. You can tell it's a man writing it, then you've messed up. You need to get these things right. So I'm sorry, it's a bit of a generalisation just off the top of my head, but I think you know what I mean. Coffee shops and cafes are great places to sort of eavesdrop, dare I say it. And I don't recommend you sit there making notes, and definitely don't make secret recordings while you sip your cappuccino, but it's a good habit to sort of just listen out for little snippets here and there and just make a little mental notes. You do hear some great things, and going around, like if you're going around a big shop somewhere, a big kind of supermarket type thing, you hear all kinds of little snippets, people talking to each other, talking to their kids, and it's quite hilarious, the things you come up with, and just kind of store them away in the back of your mind. And I think really I've probably rabbited on enough about that, talked too much about talking, so I'll crack on with the listener feedback section. Okay, well, we did have a couple of bits of listener feedback from the last show, all that time ago. So over on the website at writingtalkpodcast.com, a listener called Mark mentioned a writing group that he discovered that had set up in their local community centre, and I don't think he could go to it himself, but he's just reporting what they were doing, which was great, because this group had a really good idea. They'd clubbed together and hired an experienced writing tutor to have their sessions each week, and I just think that was, lucky them. That's really a fantastic resource. What a good idea. So maybe it's worth putting out some feelers, seeing if there's any writers in your area. Maybe you could do something like that. Often you find that there'll be a community facility somewhere which is quite cheap to hire. And so if everybody chips in a little bit each week and goes along, something to think about. I thought, really nice idea. And over on Spreaker.com, which is where the podcast media are actually hosted, and you can actually comment on that. If you go to the writingtalkpodcast.com, there's a little play widget for each episode, and you can actually comment on there as well as sharing it from there, listening to it on the widget and so on. And Stephen Smith, who's been a really good supporter of the show, so thank you, Stephen, said he hadn't paid for any online writing courses because so far he'd found everything he needed available for free. And there is a huge amount out there, so I think you're dead right, Stephen. And he was kind enough to mention a free online course that's on YouTube, run by a writer called Brandon Sanderson. And I plan on watching through that. I've certainly been off and found it. So I will put the note in the show notes. So the link will be there to the playlist in the show notes at writingtalkpodcast.com. It was quite easy to find, actually. So you can search for Brandon Sanderson's writing class or something on YouTube. And I think there are about 14 lectures there, so that's great that somebody's given away an entire course they've done for free, so it's wonderful. So thanks, Stephen, that was great, and thank you also to Mark. Thank you for everyone who's contributed. So for this week, I'm going to then do something slightly different with this section of the show, and it ties in with the whole Writer's Toolbox section, so they're kind of running together here. So the resource in our Writer's Toolbox this week is the new Facebook group that I've set up to accompany the podcast. So I'm very happy for you to carry on if you wish to comment on the website or on Spreaker. That's all absolutely fine. But to get this group going, I think it'd be really nice to get the Facebook group going. So if you head on over to facebook.com/groups/WTP workshop, post comments and questions in there, and this week's subject, of course, will be dialogue, and I can try and answer them a little bit in the next week's show. But I have to say the purpose of the group is not just to sort of revolve around me, so that you go in, and you'd like to do a sort of a writing clinic feature where I would definitely comment on it, but please join the group and you can answer somebody else's question. Of course you can. Feel free, dive in. If you can help someone, then comment away in there. And feel free to do so. I mean, that's the whole point of the group. It's not about me being a sort of sage on the stage, as I say. It's all about a bit of mutual support. So any questions or comments, feedback generally about writing effective dialogue. Of course, any feedback you'd like to give me as well, any comments on the show, any encouragement's always welcome. So that's the toolbox session, is to go along, join that group. And heck, if you don't like it, you can always leave it again, can't you, later? But it'd be nice to build it up. I guess we'll probably start a bit small. It'll take a little while to get going. But it'd be nice to have people there. And you can share that group around, share it with some of your friends. And it'd be a nice way for us to kind of keep in touch and help each other out. Okay. Well, that's pretty much it for this week. I've kind of rattled through a lot, I feel. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please do share the podcast with your writer friends. We are getting a little bit more popular now, which is lovely. But it's still quite early, and hopefully it'll encourage me to make sure I get one out on time every week as well. So if you want to post a link to the podcast or the website and any of the writing groups you're in or anything like that, any writing websites or forums, please do. Or maybe share it on Twitter or Facebook or something. And if you could subscribe, you can subscribe all different ways. You can subscribe on Spreaker itself, or on iTunes, or on Stitcher. There's a YouTube channel even. So there's all those things. And you can even go on to writingtalkpodcast.com, where there's a few other methods as well in the sort of subscribe widget, and you can have them emailed to you if you wish. You just sign up and you get an automated email each time there's an episode. A link pops into your inbox. Okay, and of course all the show notes will be there as well, with all the links and resources and so on. So thank you very much for listening and for all your support. So until next week, keep writing, keep tapping at the keys, keep scribbling away, and above all, keep smiling. Goodbye.